are following new developments on the FBI search of former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort earlier this month. A federal judge in Florida is considering Trump's request for a special master to oversee a review of seized materials. Meanwhile, CBS News obtained a letter from a top intelligence official saying that there will be a review of the national security risk posed by the top secret documents. So senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge is joining me now. Following the story, we're going to talk a little bit more about the latest developments here. So, Catherine, good morning.
Good morning.
So let's start with this appointment of a special master. The judge says that she is inclined to grant Donald Trump his request. But as I recall, the initial request was for a special master to be appointed before the federal government got a chance to review the documents. That doesn't seem like it's going to happen, even if he does get a special master.
Well, that's right, Anne-Marie. So just sort of as a starting point, typically in situations like this, the FBI uses what's called a taint team or a filter team to go through the records that have been taken to figure out what can stay in the criminal investigation and what is, for example, like attorney-client privilege, or also in this case, executive privilege, and needs to be set to one side. A special master would have that role. So instead of the Bureau, this would be an outside independent party that would do this filtering of the records seized at Mar-a-Lago. There are a couple of points here. It's going to be hard to find a special master who's got the kind of security clearance, because you would need a top-level security clearance to look at these records, given the kind of information that's alleged to be in the documents. And number two, someone who's also a specialist in these issues of privilege. And finally, what the judge has signaled is that they may be leaning towards a special master, but you're right, it hasn't stopped the process from continuing by this FBI team in the meantime, Anne-Marie.
You know, it's not unlike Donald Trump and his legal team at times to do things to slow down the process. They're sort of really good at that. And so in terms of an appointment of a special master, I guess, how common is this? I'm trying to sort of figure out if this is a legal tactic to slow down the process, or if this is really something that is typically done.
I think the answer, big picture, is that it's not unusual for a special master to be appointed. If my memory serves me correctly, I think there was a special master appointed in the Michael Cohen case, again, to sort of separate out what was relevant to the investigation and what really was extraneous and should be excluded. You're also correct that a special master will kind of slow roll the process, right? It's another person coming in and then reassessing the records. Some former prosecutors I spoke to when this issue was first raised about a week ago said it probably makes sense in this case for the government not to object and to err on the side of caution, because every single element of this case will be appealed or challenged in court in the future, and having an independent outside party rather than an FBI filter or taint team look at the records kind of gives them that extra level of insulation, if you will.
So you mentioned National Intelligence's review of these materials, and they have a process as well. At the end of that process, will there be, like, I don't know, a report made public? Will we sort of see, well, you know, these documents were a matter of attorney-client privilege, but these documents were listed as top secret?
Well, this is called a risk assessment, and what the intelligence community will do, Anne-Marie, is determine what records seized by the FBI remain classified to this day. Just because a record is marked classified doesn't mean that somewhere along the way it was ultimately declassified through proper channels. That's number one. Then they're going to say, okay, now that we have this pool of records that are still classified to this day, what would the national security impact be if they fell into the wrong hands? My expectation is that this information will be provided to Congress, and probably in some unclassified or redacted version, given that this letter has been available to reporters about the assessment taking place. Just final point, this stops short of what's called a formal damage assessment. Whenever they think there's been the unauthorized disclosure of classified information, there's something called IC Directive 732, and it mandates that a damage assessment has to be done to determine whether, let's say, human spies have now been outed in the process and need to be pulled back from the field, Anne-Marie.
And before I let you go, Catherine, I just want to sort of remind people of the news that broke on Friday. It was like lunchtime for a lot of people that I even watched, but I was watching you at the CBS News special report. The affidavit was released. A lot of it was redacted. I was actually I'm always impressed by you, Catherine, but I was really impressed by, what you were able to glean from the bits of information that was not redacted. So can we talk a little bit about what we learned from the affidavit, if there was anything new or valuable?
I think one of the most important elements of that affidavit, Anne-Marie, is it gave us new insight into these 15 boxes of records that were recovered by the National Archives much earlier this year. And according to this partially unsealed affidavit that justified the search at Mar-a-Lago, there were 67 documents marked confidential. That's the lowest level of classification. Another 92 marked secret, and then another 25 marked top secret. And those are the kind of records that have restricted access and are so closely guarded by the U.S. government. But on top of that, there were records that had this coding HCS. That is Human Control System. That's a fancy way of saying that we're talking about intelligence from human spies. Also something called FISA. This is intelligence that is derived from this National Security Surveillance Court. Other things marked no foreign, which means that no foreign national can get access to them. So we got a lot more granular detail about the sort of the quality and what may be the ultimate classification of the records that were recovered in that search.
Really interesting. Catherine, thank you very much.